Hello everyone, welcome back to the next instalment of our series, Christ at Christmas. First of all, it's very dark outside, so I've had to put lots of lights on, so I apologise for any glinting off my head that may happen. I hope it's not too distracting in the video. So just want to jump straight in really where we left off in the last video. We're going to read some verses from Matthew 1. We're going to read verses 20 to 23. It says this, "But as Joseph considered these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, 'Joseph, son of David,'" now we've heard that before, "do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us." So I want to start by looking at these couple of sentences of prophecy that Matthew chooses to include in this passage, which is really the heart of this passage. It helps us to unlock the depth of what Matthew wants to draw out and wants us to understand about what he's saying here. It's just to remember that Matthew was a Jewish man writing to a primarily Jewish audience at the time. And for them, there wasn't any Netflix. There were simply the scriptures. There was no theatre or cinema. Instead, there were stories of old, told and retold, studied and memorized, digested and debated. These scriptures were their life. They could recall them, bring them to mind. They were immersed in them. So these two verses in this passage come from Isaiah chapter 17 and verse 14. Now, those familiar with Isaiah 7, as Matthew's original audience would have been, they knew the deal. They understood the context, that at the time Isaiah was prophesying this, things were going badly for the kingdom of Judah. King Ahaz, who was a descendant of David, he was king of Judah, and he was making a load of bad decisions and alliances with violent nations rather than looking to and trusting in Yahweh for safety and for deliverance. So Yahweh sends his prophet Isaiah, his mouthpiece, his spokesman, to try and get King Ahaz to turn to him and to trust him. But Ahaz doesn't, and it doesn't go well for Judah. They are invaded and crippled by the spectacularly brutal nation that was the Assyrians. And you can read about that in 2 Kings chapter 16 and 17. So this is where Isaiah is prophesying into. But as is often the way, this isn't a little passage in isolation, but it's part of a bigger unit of prophecy found in Isaiah that would have all come to mind for those who are immersed in the Hebrew scriptures, as Matthew's original audience would have been. And so linked to this passage in Isaiah 7 is a passage of prophecy about a future promise of deliverance and faithfulness from God that seems to go way beyond, is way bigger than anything that Israel were experiencing at the time. We now call that passage Isaiah 9, which is pretty familiar to us often at Christmas time. But remember that this promise of future deliverance and faithfulness was coming to a people who were being invaded at the time by brutally violent warriors committing all sorts of atrocities and trauma along the way. So let's read Isaiah 9, which we will be familiar with at Christmas time, but this should hopefully bring a bit more light to it and understanding around it. Isaiah 9 verse 2. The people who walked in darkness, just remember the context of this, these people who've been invaded. It would have felt pretty dark. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shined. You have multiplied the nation, you have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. For the yoke of his burden and the staff for his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor you have broken as on the day of Midian. For every boot of the tramping warrior in battle tumult, and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. So when we understand some of the background context to what is going on. And we read here that this one coming, something is going to happen where every boot of the tramping warrior and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fire. That is exactly what those hearers wanted to hear. That is what we want to happen, these warriors to be put an end to. Now imagine you are a first century Israelite, and it's no longer the Assyrians, but now it is the Romans. But you are equally invaded and crippled as a nation, equally as brutally suppressed and oppressed. But now it is the Romans rather than the Assyrians. So this promised one who is coming is again exactly what they want to hear. They want to hear, the boots of the warriors and the garments rolled in blood need to be put an end to. It's why we so often say that the Israelites at the time of Jesus were expecting this Messiah to be a military king who was going to free them from their enemies, because that is basically what this passage and others like it say. But remember that, as we have seen already in these videos, the Messiah to come was the expected one. But who is he? Well, the passage carries on in verse 6. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. That would have been music to the ears of those being invaded. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness, from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of Yahweh of hosts will do this. This passage, it kind of really builds in hope. Remember the context of the people first hearing it, and then reveals someone who in verse 6 is clearly human. Okay, a child is born. Is there anything more human than being a baby? I mean, every human who's ever lived has once been one. A son is given. Now that links back to the Isaiah 7 verse that Matthew quotes from. It says, to a virgin a son will be born. But this clearly human child, in the very same verse, in fact in the next sentence, is actually still almost certainly divine. He will be called Mighty God. What? The first hearers would have thought, who could this possibly be? That's crazy. We get so used to these passages, but imagine yourself hearing this for the first time, thinking, who is this? A human child who will be called Mighty God. And then we get this beautiful surprise in the next verse, that we learn that this child who is Mighty God will be the one seated on David's throne forever, will be the long waited for son of David, the messianic king. And then it says in verse 7 that the increase of his government and of peace, there will be no end. His rule and justice will be therefore eternal and all-encompassing. Now that must mean that he is not only going to rule over Israel, but all the nations. If his government and peace will never end, will continue to increase forever, he must be therefore ruling over not only Israel, but the Gentiles too, and bringing peace, justice, and righteousness to all the nations. You could say, therefore, every family in the earth, every nation will be blessed through him. Now that should remind us of something, a promise that was given to Abraham, that through Abraham's offspring, all the nations, all the families even of the earth will be blessed. So here in this Isaiah 9 passage, it's saying this son of David will bring about the blessings promised to Abraham. So you could say this mysterious human child who is somehow mighty God is the son of David and the son of Abraham. Interesting. Then let's just turn back to the Matthew passage. We'll read one verse in Matthew, verse 21. It said this, Mary, she will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. Now, at first reading, we're like, yeah, cool. Jesus will save people from their sins. Great. What's significant about that? But actually, we need to dig a little bit deeper. Okay, so Jesus in Hebrew is the name Yeshua. And Yeshua means Yahweh saves. Okay, so if you read it like that, it says this, and you shall call his name Yahweh Saves, for he will save his people from their sins. Now, if you read it like that, you kind of think, oh, hold on, who will save his people from their sins? Yahweh saves, and he will save his people from their sins. So who is it? Is it Yahweh who will save, or is it this baby called Yahweh Saves? It's supposed to be a slightly mysterious verse, almost a reference to the mystery of Isaiah 9. Who is this baby? See, we see in Jesus' name, firstly, his true humanity, that he was a real Jewish baby boy. He was called Yeshua. But his name also suggests, in this shadowy way, in the same way that Isaiah 9 does, that he is also the divine God of Israel. Because that's what his name means. Yahweh saves. And we know from Psalm 3 that salvation belongs to the Lord. Salvation belongs to Yahweh. And so but here in this verse, it belongs to Jesus. Who is this? Well, Matthew clears it up for us 2 verses later by quoting from Isaiah 7 and says, and they will call him Emmanuel. And then Matthew clears it up for us once and for all by saying, which means God with us. But what will he do? Well, he will save the people, his people, from their sins. Now again, imagine you're a first century Israelite hearing that. Imagine you're Joseph hearing that. You would probably think, what? But I don't need saving from my sins. I need saving from the Romans. I thought that's what the Messiah was supposed to do. This son of David, that's what he was supposed to do, right? The Messiah is supposed to deliver us from the tramping warriors. That's what Isaiah 9 says. Saving me from my sins sounds almost a bit small in comparison to overthrowing the whole Roman Empire. Are you mean to tell me that my biggest problem isn't out there, it's in here? Now that's what this passage should make people think. That's almost the question that Matthew intends to leave hanging from this passage. And it doesn't get resolved here, but it does. Matthew sort of tease up here this ongoing story of Jesus, the unexpected Messiah, the one who comes to save his people from the tramping warriors, from their greatest enemies. However, their greatest enemies may not be the ones that they expect. And so the story of the unexpected Messiah continues. So from this passage we have seen then that this more than human one, this mysterious human baby who is also perhaps God himself, would be the one on the throne of David forever and ever, the son of David who brings about the blessings for the whole world given to Abraham. The son of David, son of Abraham, is no less than Emmanuel, God with us. Jesus, the human child who is Yahweh who saves, God become man, the Word become flesh. It would seem that Yahweh is not only a God who sends, but a God who comes to tackle Israel's and in fact all of mankind's greatest enemies for them. To us a child is born, to us a son is given. See you in the next video.